Thank you for inviting Physicians for Human Rights to be here. We have been working on the issue of health professionals in human rights violations related to national security detainees in the context of the War on Terror for many years. And we've relied heavily on some of you in this room who have been courageous whistleblowers really to call out psychologists who've been engaged in that, and we couldn't have done the work that we did without support, for instance, of the people from the Coalition for Ethical Society. So I want to thank you all. There are a couple points that I think I want to make about this, and one is to talk about having done an analysis of the Hoffman report, reiterating Physicians for Human Rights' key concerns and calls for what the American Psychological Association needs to do. The first one is obviously reform. There needs to be a very strict rule excluding psychologists, as other health associations have done, from participation in interrogations. It's quite simple. A concept of a harm reduction model simply does not work when one person is trying to hurt another. That is why doctors do not engage in monitor to keep torture victims alive, why they do not engage in helping with executions. When the underlying act is about harm to another, harm reduction models simply do not work. And it is critically important that no one in a health professional engage in that. The second thing that the American Psychological Association really needs to do is, I think, in particular, revise its ethical standards to be the highest possible standards. The weakening in the standards was utterly unconscionable, and the time now is to really say that the American Psychological Association needs to lead in what the standards should be to be the absolute strongest and the best. I want to talk about why it matters for people who have not particularly engaged in this issue. In the healing profession, we can never be silent witnesses to human rights violations and abuses of other people. I work for an organization that is both about people in the health professions and about human rights. And human rights is ultimately about the inherent dignity and equality of everyone. It is not about torture. It's not about corruption. It's not about self-aggrandizement. It is about that inherent respect for everyone. Which brings me to the third point, which is really justice for the victims. We've mentioned Abu Ghraib today. We've mentioned the black sites run by the CIA. We've mentioned Guantanamo. And of course, there's also Bagram Air Force Base, where so much of this torture happened. In Guantanamo Bay alone, 780 men and boys, children in their early teens, have gone through Guantanamo Bay. And every one of them, including those who have been cleared for release and released, have been denied any access to justice for what happened to them. And to be absolutely clear, Guantanamo Bay is a rights-free zone. It remains a rights-free zone. And the interrogations that happened there are unlawful because the entire system of detention in Guantanamo Bay is unlawful. If you are the victim of human rights violations, it is imperative that you have access to justice and an effective remedy. Every one of those detainees has been denied that. If the American Psychological Association starts holding the people within the psychological community who contributed to torture accountable, it's the beginning of possibly some healing for some of those detainees who have not been utterly destroyed. And I want you to understand that part of what we do at Physicians for Human Rights, working with our experts, is actually do assessments of victims of torture around the world, including some of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay. And the harm from torture is devastating. And the harm of those who've been held in the rights-free zone of Guantanamo Bay has been utterly devastating. Some of those recently released were in for more than 10 years. They may have been cleared and told they were going to be released for years, and yet they remained in a place in where they had no meaningful access to the outside world, and then they were dumped in a place that often was not their own home. And in a world that has changed profoundly. Imagine if you had been asleep for the last 10 years, or imagine if you've been sleep deprived for the last 10 years, what your life must be like. That they are coming out and finding that perhaps their home country is being torn apart by a civil war. They've never seen a cell phone. They have not seen their families for years. They already are being treated as pariah in the countries where they've gone to. Which brings me to the final issue, which really is about justice across the board. In human rights, it is absolutely clear that torture is not just completely prohibited along with cruel and inhuman degrading treatment and punishment, but there is an imperative of all states to investigate and prosecute those responsible for torture. That's how strong the prohibition is. And yet, we have this language about moving forward, recognizing the circumstances in which this happened, people being patriots, the defense of their engaging in torture. What that sends is a message of, yes, we know it's unlawful, yes, we know it's absolutely prohibited, but wink, wink. When you need to, you can get away with it, and the next time it has to happen, you'll get away with it again. That is not the United States that I want to live in. It's not a world I want to live in. I want a world in which people's dignity and equality is what is valued, and when those who abuse their power use their power to harm people, that they are held accountable. It's the only way we will create a truly just world. Thank you.